Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, sponsored by the Draft Professors. We have a big crowd for you today. We have Owen and Jerry in their normal slots. We have Gabe coming in to talk a little bit of Denver Broncos. And Adam, this is your first Draft Professor podcast. Welcome to the channel. You want to let everybody kind of know who you are a little bit?
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me on. Wanted to start there, but now my name obviously is Adam. I work right now for the University of San Diego. So I'm working there now for about 3 years now. Toreros, yeah. It's where, Harbaugh, Kincaid, all those guys got their starts there. So I work there in recruiting and personnel. So happy to be on, happy to be here. And then if you guys want to just see more, about me or just more of my content, my Twitter is at ImpactFBData. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I have to say this real quick to Adam. We do have a connection that you probably won't like, but my oldest son played at and coached at Drake University. You guys play each other. Drake, like the last 2 to 3 years, has won the PFL Pioneer Football League championship. So, yeah, we're Drake people in this house. So, we got friction already.
They've gotten the best of us over the past 2 or 3 years. So,
well, we didn't before that, believe me.
Yeah.
Well, nice having you on, Adam. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
And Gabe, it's been a little bit. You were on last draft cycle. And we're doing a Denver Broncos themed podcast, so I know where I can get that bread buttered. But welcome back to the channel. And how are you right now?
Yeah, doing great. Thank you very much. This is normally this time of year I'm neck deep already in draft related content, but in a rare turn of events, the Denver Broncos are advancing their way through the playoffs, and so. So this is a great opportunity to sit and talk about the Broncos in something other than, somewhere in the middle of the draft order. And looking forward to spending some time with y'all. Likewise, to what Adam mentioned there, if you want to follow a little bit more of what I have to talk about right now, you'll get a lot of Denver Broncos stuff. I'll tell you that, but I'm at Blue Ridge Bronc 1 on Twixter. And, please feel free to reach out directly if you want to connect over anything, any other opportunities to chat on draft related content. So, thank you very much.
Yeah. So, Owen, Jerry, good to see you guys as always.
Pleasure to see you, Jim.
Yeah. Every year during this week, Draft Professor breaks down the final 4 teams looking for roster building trends that we could extrapolate out. So if your team isn't in the playoffs, how could we measure your roster? And specifically, this podcast is going to focus on Denver. I've got a little bit of data I'm going to use to kind of kick off the show. So Denver's starters, 8 of their starters on offense were acquired by the draft. 4 of their starters on defense were acquired by the draft. That would imply that 3 of the offensive starters were free agents and 7 of the defensive starters were free agents. My big takeaway is that every single one of the final 4 teams has double-digit starters acquired by free agency, which is high. Like, we do this podcast every year at this time. Last year, like, the most was the Commanders, but then the other 3 teams were all like 5 starters acquired by free agency. So, Gabe, as you look at the free agent signings by Denver, without necessarily diving in and doing a deep dive on like the 11 or 12 signings, could you summarize how you think Denver attacked free agency?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, I think to do that and do it well, I think we have to sort of peel back the layers of the onion a bit. what's happening in Denver, or what has happened in Denver over the last several years, has really a lot to do with the hiring of Sean Payton. So love him or hate him, and a lot of people, he's like sandpaper. He kind of rubs some people the wrong way. But one thing that he has done very well in Denver is a culture shift. And so the free agent signings that you see, they have certain characteristics that we can get into and talk a little bit more about over time. But the reality is the bulk of those free agent signings were signed with that culture shift in mind. Some of them are scheme shift as well, but a lot of them share certain traits that we can get into a bit. So I'd say that the other contributing factor to that, when you get into the scheme side of things, there are a lot of players in Denver that at one point or another played in New Orleans. And so that free agent signing piece also is tainted by bringing in people who will help shift that culture to what Sean Payton's looking to achieve there. Some of them was stuck around. Malcolm Roach is a great example of those who he's been a huge culture shift piece. Will Lutz is another guy. Adam Troutman, another guy. Those are all guys that came over from the New Orleans Saints, but they've been huge advocates, grassroots level advocates for that culture shift. So yeah, that's a big high overview of how we ended up with that many at any given point. And the rest of it, I think, is more scheme related.
So I have a question for Jerry on building an offensive line. So I believe at least two of Denver's offensive linemen were acquired, starting offensive linemen were acquired by free agency. Jerry, does it, like when you're an offensive lineman and whether you're drafted versus you're bringing a free agent in, did it matter to you? Like if you're playing next to a guy that was drafted, you just cared the guy next to you could play.
All you care about is the guy can play, right? I mean, you got to obviously work communication and technique stuff and all that. Most of these guys got cross. They might not be on the same team, but a lot of times you get cross training through different coaches that coach the same stuff because of coaching trees and all that. I think there's a lot of misnomer with offensive line play that yes, there are different techniques and stuff, but a lot of the stuff is very similar, and you just tweak a few things. But no, I mean, really, what you want to know is, can I communicate with this person? Do they understand? Can we work this thing out and all that? So. Not really. I mean, I watched their O-line quite a bit. I mean, it's a good group. Bowles on one side, McGlinchey on the other side. Those were good additions. I think Bowles has actually played at a level that I think he's probably up for Protector of the Year this year. Had a really good year. Little different type of offensive line, probably longer, probably move a lot better, not quite hardcore inside zone. They do some different stuff. But I like the group. They're very athletic, and, they do a good job of getting nicks free and pass protection and all that. So, but no, to answer your question, it's just about building chemistry. And when you got vets that have played in the league for as long as these guys have on that offensive line, there really is no problem as far as getting that worked out over time.
So, Adam, when you look at how the Broncos have built their team, anything stand out to you?
I think that the biggest thing that I see from them is that I think they've done an excellent job of just hitting on just those second to third tier players, whether that's in free agency or in the draft as well. And so I think that a lot of guys look at their team, and they see, Pat Surtain, Hufanga, Sutton, and all those guys. But, I think that it's more so the contributions of those just second, third tier guys that have been able to just give this team depth over the years. And so I think that that's just the biggest thing from a team building standpoint that stands out. And, I think that that's a big credit to the GM there. I think that's just the biggest thing that I see.
And then Owen, anything that you want to point out, like any observations you can make, is when you look at how Denver built their roster, anything stand out to you?
I think for me, it was a lot of focusing on the skill-specific players for their roster specifically. A lot of these players, I think, wouldn't translate cleanly to a lot of other teams, but with what they wanted to do ever since Sean Payton took over there, with Vance Joseph on defense there, I think that's what really made the shifted their focus and allowed them to grab players that maybe other teams wouldn't value as highly, like Zach Allen for $16 million a year from the Arizona Cardinals, Malcolm Roach being a contributor from the Saints. Even looking at the offense, you see them invest in Evan Ingram for that joker tight end position, and Courtland Sutton having a role that's different than what he had previously in the same Broncos offense. So you have a guy that comes in, establishes what he knows he likes at his positions, knows he has a winning formula when it comes to his scheme, and brings in veteran pieces on the defense. He knows what he wants on his scheme, allowing you to then go attack these specific players that are going to be contributors in your defense or in your offense, especially in that free agency market, guys who are established and know what they're doing, while still bringing up the guys within your organization like Nick Bonito, Courtland Sutton, who were there previously that still match that, and then moving off of guys who aren't there. So a combination of that and just getting the coaching quarterback right has turned the team around that previously missed the playoffs since like 2015 when they made that Super Bowl run, and had, the Trevor Siemians of the world, and Brock Osweiler is playing quarterback for them since then. So once they finally got stability in the two most important spots and then knew what they wanted to be and attacked those things, regardless of what other teams valued guys at, because they knew those guys would fit their system, they bought in and were able to have a complete roster because of that, even if, like, say, they're not transcendent all pros or considerably a large amount of Pro Bowls across that roster.
So, Gabe, I counted 27 players on the Broncos roster that were drafted by Denver. And Pro Football Reference, by the way, is my source for all this. So I have counted all 32 teams' rosters, one team at a time. When you look at the 27, so that 27 is actually in the bottom half of the league, right? Just to give everybody an idea, like 27 players that your team drafted is not a lot. The leaders in that metric, the Ravens have 38, the Bills have 37, the Packers have 37, the Chiefs have 35. So that 27 is a little bit below that, right? And that would be in the bottom half of the league. If you were to look at the theme of the 27, it felt like most of them were drafted by the current regime. But Denver has 10 players that have been on the team at least 4 years that they've drafted. So when you look at that, like, and you look at like the age of the players that Denver specifically has drafted, anything jump out to you? Like, I think somebody mentioned Courtland Sutton as a holdover from the prior coaching regime, but he's not the only one. So they've drafted relatively well even before Sean Payton got there. Do you think?
Yeah, they have. George Payton, when he was initially hired, he was sort of a golden boy opportunity, looking for his first opportunity as a general manager. And he hasn't disappointed. He's caught a little bit of some flack for the Russell Wilson trade, but I think everybody in this room, if they were honest with themselves, would say that in a heartbeat at the time, knowing what we knew, would have done what he did. Could we have predicted that it would have turned out the way that it did? No, neither could he have. But when it comes to drafting, honestly, I think the number one thing that he knows how to do is, so my side gig is human resources. And honestly, the ability to take an order from somebody, to hear their needs and translate those needs into, an actual workable product on the field, that kind of sinks or sets teams for the future. And George Payton, to his credit, he's really good at that, figuring out what it is that you need. It helps in this, with Sean Payton, because Sean Payton loves the draft. He is involved in the draft. Whereas, you look at those, you look at the players who have survived and who were drafted by the Broncos. Almost all of them were George Payton draft picks at this point. And really, we talked about it a little bit in chat on the side. You're looking at guys like Jonathan Cooper, who was a 7th round draft pick and is now starting opposite Nick Bonito and playing, phenomenally, particularly as a, 7th round draft pick. Quinn Miners as a 3rd round draft pick. He's an all pro. So you get these guys that, people saw value in, but weren't willing to necessarily take the plunge, and it's paid off for him. I would say, you do have a guy like Pat Surtain, who was sort of just a no-brainer, best player available. But I'll tell you what, he caught a lot of flack from a lot of people for not drafting Justin Fields at the time. So I think, there is some willingness to step out on a limb and have tomatoes thrown at you on a routine basis that he has. He doesn't care what people think about him. He cares about getting good players in there. And so, Nick Bonito's another example of that, where he maybe caught some flack for taking him over others. But yeah, I'd say George Payton's ability to play well with whoever those current coaches are, Nathaniel Hackett or Sean Payton, there's a big difference between those two, and he's been able to weather both of those.
So, Jerry, do you think there's any lessons to be learned from how Denver handled Russell Wilson? I recognize that was 2 years ago, but I would think that has a lot to do with Denver being where it is today. But how do you see that? Jerry, I think you're muted.
All right, I'm back. I agree with Gabe 100%. I mean, it wasn't just Denver. New York Giants, they did it. They took a chance on him. Pittsburgh took a chance. I mean, everybody took a chance on him, right? You can't fault him for doing that. But obviously, Russell at that point in his career kind of lost some of his skill set and didn't want to accept it. And then obviously him and Peyton aren't going to see eye to eye. They're going to get into it. So, but no, I mean, I don't have any problem with what they did. I mean, they were in need of a quarterback. They were able to draft Nix, and Nix is fine. I'm still not completely sold on Nix. Now we'll see what Peyton does with him, if he can continue to get him to progress and get better. I mean, I don't know if he'll turn him into Drew Brees, but he'll be functional in that offense, and everything else. The thing that I expect to see out of Peyton, and I don't know how y'all feel about this, but they're going to find a way to run the football at some point, I believe. I mean, and they run it now pretty good, but it's going to be. I mean, he's a Parcells guy. Come on. I mean, this is a Parcells guy. It's just like this week, we talked about it today on one of the podcasts I was on. I don't know if you remember Mark Collins, who played for the Super Bowl teams that Parcells coached in New York with the Giants. And, he said, I know Sean Payton has already called Bill Parcells about the Knicks ankle situation, and then they got to start Stidham. And he said, the guy said, well, what do you think Parcells told him? He told him, don't change a damn thing. Do exactly what you're doing, Knicks, because that's what we did when Jeff Hostetler took over for Phil Simms, and then Hostetler goes and wins the Super Bowl. He goes, you don't change who you are. He goes, you might tweak a few things. He goes, but you do what you do. And, I've picked Denver to win this weekend. I think Denver is going to win in Denver and beat the Patriots. I like the way the defense sets up. I think, one thing about the Patriots that's different is, they're good defensively, but they only got like 34 sacks on the year. Denver's rolling in with 68, but so I think it sets up well, and I expect Denver to win. So, but I don't think they're going to change a bunch just because they got a backup quarterback in there.
So, Adam, if you see a team take a huge dead cap hit like the Broncos took when they let go of Russell Wilson, when you look at like how that has set the team up now, do you have any analysis on that or conclusions?
Yeah, so I think what Denver did and what George Payton and them did was smart, just because I think that at the point of where Russell Wilson was, I think that just cutting your losses from just that contract, all the mistakes, and just all of just the noise surrounding him and everything like that. At first, of course, I think that you're a little bit surprised that they just cut him and that they just took all that dead cap on. But, once you look back on that 2-3 years after that, I mean, I think that it's more than safe to say that they made the right choice there, and that, any team who's in a similar contract structure with their quarterback, I think that they would be best to follow what they did there. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was smart.
So, Owen, similar question, like seeing a team move on, taking on a huge dead cap hit. We've seen whether it's Buffalo doing it with Diggs, but this seems to happen like every year around the NFL. Better to get rid of a player a year early, or better just to let the contract sit on the back of the roster, aka the Browns with Deshaun Watson? How can you maybe make any conclusions from that?
Yeah, I think in the two scenarios that you brought up with Watson, with Russell Wilson and with Diggs, the Bills and the Broncos specifically made moves that were with that understanding that the dead cap would impact them in the now more so, but they'd rather take the lumps now than at the back end of the contract, because oftentimes with these modern day contracts, you have these void years tacked on to the end of them, causing dead cap situations to occur regardless. Where you're going to either front load that dead cap and have less cap space in the immediate, or it's going to be a persistent issue for you as long as you have void years still left in that contract when it authentically runs out. So you have a situation where you're already kind of invested a ton of capital into going after Russell Wilson. It's like, okay, we're trying to turn this around as fast as we possibly can. We're already suffering the short term because of this lack of draft pick capital. Might as well take the dead cap on the chin right now. And then once all that stuff, the draft capital and the dead cap all goes away, which i.e. this past offseason where you finally have a first round pick again, you take Jahdae Barron, and you go from having something like $80 million in dead cap to only like $1 or $2 million this past offseason dead cap. You now have opportunities to invest that present tense capital, which they did, in bringing in different players that have positively affected their roster this year. In addition to now you have more access to future cap to be able to tap into for those contracts as well. So they took their lumps for the 2 or 3 years they needed to, because they knew that decision was detrimental to their current roster and their current way of playing. They also had a 1-year head coach. Like the whole short term of that team after the Russell Wilson trade was just imploding on it, whether it's coach, the quarterback play, the quarterback contract, the lack of draft capital, all of that coming together. They knew they were kind of in a position where they couldn't really compete with that. So they went and made those moves to just pile it on. Might as well just accept it at that point. And then once you get to the point where you can now start turning it back around, you have every possible available asset that you can have, as opposed to only half of that when you have more dead cap loaded onto the end of that process.
Gabe, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are they still rolling on a bunch of rookie contracts on that roster?
Yeah. Well, so in terms of, so that's kind of an interesting thing that
right. That's what I'm. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, when we start talking about how the Broncos are handling two things. One, new ownership has been really willing to pour a lot of cash into stuff. And so you're seeing a lot of these folks who have outperformed their contracts. We'll look at like a Pat Surtain or a Nick Bonito, who really would still be on the tail end of their contracts. They're signing them ahead of the end of their contract, significantly ahead. So they're getting ahead of all of those big contracts that are coming out. A lot of folks kind of waiting until the contract expires, and now suddenly, here you are with you're resetting the market with these contracts. Whereas instead, the Broncos are signing these guys early. They're not on rookie contracts, but the reason they can do that is because the biggest contract that would be on their books is Bo Nix, and Bo Nix is not, he's rookie, and we're going to get to ride that for a little bit. Russell Wilson. When you look at that situation, to Owen's point, they took all of the hit up front as quick. It was just, let's rip the Band-Aid off, because it was addition by subtraction. It was one of these things that said, well, look, we're shifting culture. And so, to our previous discussion, we're going to bring in free agents that help us to get there more quickly. You mentioned Mike McGlinchey. That dude's he's a behemoth, but at the same time, really what he is, he's a huge locker room influence.
Yeah.
And so you bring in guys like that who he could be a politician. If you just watch any one of his interviews, you realize pretty quickly how these guys all carry the same characteristic. Russell Wilson was destined for defeat right off of the bat, just because he had an entourage and he had, so huge social media presence and did all these things that were so not football. And Sean Payton is all about football guys first. So people who demonstrate that they are that. Cortland Sutton is an example of a guy where Sean Payton did not make a determination about him right away. He wasn't convinced that he was the right fit for his offense. And so he kicked it down the road just a little bit. But when he saw that he could do it and that he was a positive influence on it, he stayed around. But rookies, we've got several rookie contracts still going on, but honestly, if you've performed well enough after your second or third year, the team's, modus operandi has pretty well been, let's just go ahead and lock these guys down as soon as they start to demonstrate that they're, they know what they're doing. So
two things. One, you're not dealing with the Patrick Nix 25 to 30% of your cap going to one player deal yet. And then it's basically the Philadelphia Eagles motto. It's what the Eagles do. I mean, you pay them early and kick it down the road a little bit with voidable years and all that. But yeah, okay, cool. Thanks for that, Gabe. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And Jerry, some additional data. So what I did is I looked at the 2025 roster and I looked at the 2022 roster. The 2025 roster, the Broncos have 27 players that they drafted on the roster. In 2022, they had 30. The overlap across those two is 10 players. That would imply that 17 players on the Broncos were drafted by Denver still on their rookie deals.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, right? And again, be that 10 number that overlaps a 3-year period, that's a key number to pay attention to. Because if we were to look at the 2028 Denver Broncos, right, 3 years from now, there's only going to be between 10 and 15 players on the team in 3 years that are on the team now. So, like I said, the best teams in the league with that metric would have 18 players that were they were on the team in 2022 and they were on the team in 2025. And the number one team in that metric is actually Buffalo. Right, where Buffalo has the most players over that 4-year window on the roster.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So by keeping track of that, you can tell, does a GM know to move on from players?
I see where you're going here.
So one of the things, and Jerry, actually, I think you were alluding to this, but when you look at the Denver free agents, I don't see a market-setting contract. So they were active in free agency, and they were shelling out money, to Gabe's point. I don't see them using free agent money to reset the market at tight end or reset the market at offensive line. Adam, do you have anything maybe to add on the free agent signings of Denver, or how they throw money around or don't throw money around?
Yeah, so I think that free agency itself, can always get GMs into just trouble, paying the wrong guys, underpaying certain guys, letting them walk. But I think that the Broncos have just done a smart job of attacking that next tier of free agent where they're not having to reset the market for certain guys, but they're just getting good quality guys who may be at discounts because of, injury, maybe they had a bad year. And so I look at guys like Hufanga, McGlinchey, Ingram, guys like that, where it's like you won't have to reset or or pay those guys top of the line, but they can still be good impact contributors. So I think that they've just done a smart job of attacking it and then just finding the right undervalued guys who they know can help them out. So, yeah.
So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and to that point, as somebody who has his finger on the pulse of Broncos country and how they feel about these things, around draft and free agency time, Broncos country is typically pissed off because, they're not, if they're jumping in early, it's for somebody that, well, like for instance, Jarrett Stidham was the first free agent signing the year that he was signed, to the Broncos. That was Sean Payton's first free agent signing. That's how highly he thought of him. But Broncos country was not like jumping up and down about Jarrett Stidham at the time that happened. He was just a guy that fit within that scheme and within that culture. Or Mike McGlinchey was not somebody that, hey, I loved it. I'm all for the ground and pound stuff. I was pretty excited about Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers and having, those guys along the line, but it's not sexy picks. They're not sexy free agent spendings. We're looking for the more mercurial kinds of guys that, that are skill position players and that type of thing. So they build in the trenches, but they typically go with, scheme fit. And to your point, Adam, it's usually the second wave. You let the first wave go by and let everybody do what they're going to do. And then you jump in after things have settled a bit.
It's a smart thing
to kind of piggyback off of that, Gabe. I was looking at what they have done with both the drafts and the free agency market and how they've been really strong with investing in the defense in both lines there. But I was curious to see what the Broncos fan perspective is on how they are with attacking their skill position needs, because they did bring in RJ. They seem to have something with RJ Harvey now. Tez Williams was a player that showed flashes initially before the injury and stuff. So they've had some hits here or there. Troy Franklin the fifth is always going to be a steal for me. But even like you're looking at players like Cortland Sutton being a holdover from the previous regime, and then Evan Ingram, I'm not sure he's not what everyone was hoping he'd be, being the guy who led the league in receptions one year, but he did his job well enough. How are they with targeting? Because then you still have like your Adam Troutmans. Pat Bryant showed some flashes this season, but I don't think anybody would say he's anything more than what he currently is at the moment. I don't think anyone's really going to plant their flag at this point for Pat Bryant. But how do you feel like they've been with attacking that area of the roster?
I think it's been a shift. So the shift has been, the Broncos historically, when you look at the teams the Broncos have taken to the Super Bowl over the years, it's typically been pretty dynamic offensively. Like you've had some pretty explosive offenses when that's happened. Now, granted, the year they won the Super Bowl 2015, that was not a particularly explosive offensive year. It was all about the defense during that time. But still, we just come through that period of Peyton Manning, 5,000 plus yards and setting records, that type of thing. So a lot of Broncos country that you have right now, the fan base that you have right now, came on during that time, during that Peyton Manning. We got a lot of bandwagon folks that popped in during that time and have stayed, to their credit, through all of these lean years. But that was what the expectation is. So now when you have Sean Payton, if you just looked at the stats from Sean Payton's offenses over the years that he was in New Orleans, you'd be pretty excited about what that could be. But there's so much substitution and so many players that get a bite of the apple, if you will, in any given series, that you don't see these singularly dynamic players very often. Now you do have a couple. Here and there, Alvin Kamara is somebody who really, who you could think of pretty quickly. We haven't found that dude yet. So I'd say in terms of their excitement level, the fan base loves Pat Bryant, and rightly so. These past two concussions have been, that's been a little bit of a shell shock kind of thing. But for the most part, the hope was that Jerry Jeudy would be that that true number one, like that wide receiver one, explosive guy who could. And if you know anything about Sean Payton or have seen anything, he wasn't going to put up with too much of that sort of me first prima donna sort of thing. He'd rather take somebody that was considered a nobody by everybody else and turn them into a contributor all the time than take somebody who was me first, and so that didn't work out so hot there. But yeah, dissatisfied would probably describe it quite a bit. Usually the fan base has a pretty good idea of what they think should happen. RJ Harvey was not on. If you weren't a kind of a draft nick in the first place and you didn't know something about RJ Harvey coming in, most of Broncos country was kind of like RJ who, it didn't have any clue as to how you'd end up with that guy. So and now hey, he's proven to be a pretty strong addition, but in Sean Payton's offense, really he's that RB2. He's not. His skill set is not. He's been forced into RB1, but he's really that RB2.
So it's funny you say that, because even in the Denver mock drafts that I see, people are still mock drafting a running back to Denver in rounds 1, 2, or 3. It's moderately funny because Jolene even posted one earlier today. Gabe, I have a question. How many of the offensive linemen that are starting for Denver were new to the team this year?
New starters or new to the team?
New to the team, like they hadn't played in the scheme or the system before.
I don't think any of them was actually new to the team. So let me think through. Obviously not McGlinchey. Meinertz has been there forever. Well, Powers got injured early on, but even his replacement was somebody that was an undrafted free agent that we'd picked up in Palczewski. Previously. So he's at least second year. Both of the centers that we'd cycled through were prior years draft picks, late round draft picks. So they've had some continuity and time to gel, which, honestly, if we had new blood during this, because really the scheme changed this year too for the run game. So if we'd had new blood in the mix, with this that hadn't been around for a little while, it might have been a lot more challenging.
Well, and that was going to be, then I was going to pivot some of that information to Jerry. So Jerry, when you were playing, did it feel like to you that you needed like a full season? Like the second season playing with that offensive line group was always better than the first? Or is that just me cherry picking data for the purposes of making an argument?
I would tend to believe it's the second part of cherry picking data. You got to understand something. I'm the guy that played 4 spots up front. I played both guard, center, and right tackle. I played all over the place. I mean, I made switches from guard to right tackle in the middle of the season. So I don't get into all that. I mean, veteran players can play. And, yes, there's communication and there's nuances of playing with, a new guy next to you. But honestly, I think a lot of that is a little bit blown out of proportion. I mean, it's always good to have a veteran group, and I think Denver has a veteran group, and they meshed really, really well. But there's other guys on that. I mean, you saw that earlier this year in Buffalo when you had both tackles out, and they managed to win a game with Alec Anderson playing right tackle and Vandermark playing left tackle. I mean, these are guys that are around. I mean, you practice together, you're in the same meeting rooms. I mean, you can get it figured out. I mean, it doesn't take long. I mean, when you start sticking rookies and stuff in there, that's a little different. But veteran players, it is what it is.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I don't mind. I don't mind being told that I'm cherry picking data. I do that all the time. Occupational hazard.
I mean, that's why I firmly believe that when you learn up front, you got to learn multi-positional stuff, and that's what I always appreciated about Cromer. You learn it's just like when you learn a defense, you learn it from the back end in. It's easier to learn it from the secondary in. You learn a lot of how all the spacing goes. The same thing with O-line. I mean, you multi-positional, you learn all the spots, you should know what's going on. So, yeah, there's feel aspects and stuff. But most of the time, really getting used to new players, rookie guys. Everything else kind of falls into place pretty quick.
Well, and that's an interesting thing too. When you look at how the Broncos have drafted and filled with through free agency their offensive line, something that they always look for is positional flexibility. So
right.
You got a guy like Garrett Bowles who's been there, for forever and ever. Yes, you have him. You have McGlinchey. You've got Meinertz, who's really solid, but Meinertz he played center. He took snaps at center in college, and he could do that if you needed to. But the guys like this year, I would expect that they're going to draft an interior offensive line guy, and my expectation to that it'll be somebody who has team leadership, but it has more importantly somebody who's a positional flexibility between guard and center, able to do that pretty quickly, because that's part of what's kept them afloat this season. They've had so many interior injuries, but they've been able to mix and match, and they've always got a sixth offensive lineman on the field. Almost every drive, you've got somebody reporting eligible in there. We saw just during this game here where they actually threw to him, but if not just that, it's an extra lineman for just to run.
By the way, where did that dude's a creature?
He's amazing.
They look like they found him out of he's like kin to Bigfoot. I don't know if you saw that dude, man. Like, he's just a big old
6'8".
dude.
Yeah,
he went to Wyoming, right?
Yes, yeah,
Wyoming.
Yeah,
Wyoming.
He's a freak show, man. Big boy.
Yeah. 4.94 in the 40 for a guy that size. That he was moving.
Jeez. Wow.
So Owen, do you have anything from like the draft classes? Like, if you were to look at Denver's last two draft classes, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but do you see any prevailing themes in the 2025 or 2024 Sean Payton Broncos draft?
I think a lot of it, from what I saw, and it kind of colorized everything I've talked about at this point, which is very much scheme-specific players, where it also bled into what I asked previously about the skill weapons and things like that, because you have Pat Bryant at wide receiver, you have Jahdae Barron at corner, which they didn't end up playing him a ton this year, but he's going to be a player that factors into their defense uniquely, just from them being in that situation where they have a lot of spacing stuff and hybrid players, especially I think McMillan is one of their players they have that is like the hybrid safety corner role. If I'm wrong, correct me, Gabe. But they have players that operate in that kind of in-between area where you have your long, fast outside corners in Surtain and to an extent Riley Moss. And then you have these other hybrid type players around there. So you have Barron with the first, Bryant, who isn't your typical route you up wide receiver. The book on him coming out of college was he's big, blocks his ass off, and can get downfield and just plays hard. And I think that's kind of what you see right now. I don't think he's like super athletically dominant or anything in particular when it comes to like your traditional receiver winning. But as Gabe was saying, like, it's another thing like everybody eats, where you have different skill sets that you bring in. And if you understand how to utilize them, you can exceed what you think their limitations are coming out. So play like Pat Bryant. And that was why I also wanted to focus on the skill position guys, because then the year before in 2024, you have Troy Franklin, who I felt was a really good player, but there was a lot of concern about his size and how he's going to be utilized in an offense with his lack of size, but having speed and some route running. How can you get him some artificial separation or artificial releases off the line of scrimmage? That way he's not dealing with bigger defenders pressing him up there and gumming up his works. As well as that, you have Vele, who ends up being another player like that, big body, movement, big power slot type player. And then Audric Estime, in addition to RJ Harvey, who are both different types of running backs and unique to what they do. So there's a lot of picks here that I'm seeing, especially in the last 2 years, with the kind of Sean Payton thumbprint on it, where it's like these are guys that he knows he can utilize in his offense. And that's how they're going to operate, is by bringing these guys in, understanding how they're going to use it, and not really caring about what the common consensus is about skill sets or value when it comes to draft picks and picking players where they're seen as most valuable. Like, I had Pat Bryant in the early day 3 category, and they went up and grabbed him with a third because despite of how I thought of him, whether athletically or how well-rounded his talent pool was as a player, they knew he had a role to fill in their offense, and they're going to value that differently than somebody who's a non-biased viewer of the film itself without having any information of how that would plug and play into their offense.
So, Adam, do you have any additional insights on Denver drafting, or can you come to a conclusion on why so many late round picks are helping their roster? I think, like, when I look at it, I think that there's some mid round guys that are contributing a lot. But do you have any additional thoughts on that?
So, like, I don't think they've drafted great. I mean, they haven't drafted bad over the past 2 or 3 years, but I don't think that their draft classes as a whole have been great in terms of just being able to consistently get those just tier 1, tier 2 type guys. But at the same time, I still do think that they've been able to add just some explosive pieces to their offense, which, I think that they needed that. And, I look at guys like Mims, Franklin, Harvey, Vele, it's just guys like that where, I don't think that any of those guys are necessarily great pieces, but I still think that they've been able to help out their offense in that way. And at the same time, like those guys have all made key or, especially Harvey, Franklin, and Mims, those three in particular have made big plays for them all year. And then I think that just the most underrated part, because I don't think that this guy gets enough credit, nor do I think that his skill set or his strengths are appreciated by fans. I think that Knicks too, I think is the biggest piece of this all, just in the sense that, if this team still had all of this talent, but they had another guy or they had a backup level quarterback starting, then none of the other picks would matter. So I think that Knicks and what he does, he's accurate. He gets the ball out on time. He can, avoid sacks. He can make big plays too. And so I think that Knicks, in addition to some of the explosive pieces that they've added on offense, I think that that's been a big reason why they've been able to have success in the draft. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll go through this whole exercise about looking at the individual players and different ways they build, and it comes down to the fact that they got a quarterback they know that can play ball, and a coach that knows what he wants for each side of the ball that he coaches. And it's like, okay, you have the coach, you have the quarterback, and you know what you want to be. A lot of times that's the recipe to winning, regardless of who the individual pieces are and the cogs in the machine, especially when you're talking about how most players are gone, in the 3 to 5 year windows. So why is it that's where you need the most consistency and the most the highest level of talent, and that's where the Broncos started with. And now they can go and add players that are good, not elite players in middle rounds, and have them be effective contributors to their offense.
Yeah, and Adam, actually, I think you said something profound, but it didn't get emphasized enough, and it's not necessarily a home run draft. The key is to just not be bad.
Yeah,
at drafting, right? It's really, you don't necessarily need the home run pick or the all-pro pick. Just make sure that the draft picks contribute. And that in and of itself is actually drafting success.
Yeah, and, I think that a common theme that you'll find with good and great teams is just that they are able to just stack picks over the years and just have those guys be impact contributors to their team. And so I think that the Broncos have done a good job of that. And then, I think also too that in the drafts of 2022 and 2021, they find guys like Sertan, Nick, and just I think that being able to just stack your team with those just tier 3, tier 4 players, while also hitting on just those tier 1, those Pro Bowl level guys too. I think that is the ultimate, the recipe. So,
well, I want to pause real quick for podcaster identification. So first, I want to give a shout out to Chaw. So he is a Broncos fan, podcast with Draft Professor on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Randy will be actually joining the podcast with Newt and Owen tomorrow night to do the Patriots. So Randy is a Patriots fan. He's podcasted with Draft Professor a couple of times. So thank you, both of you, for stopping by. John is going to be doing some Detroit Lions mocks on Draft Professor tomorrow. So, John, thank you for stopping by. And Jordan, thank you for stopping by. Owen, do you want to tell everybody who you are, about the weekly huddle, and all of the other things that you do?
Yeah, so I have run a channel over at Weekly Huddle on YouTube. I'm simul streaming this right now to there. I'm on the Miss Irrelevant podcast 2 times a week. Jim found it fitting that I had to podcast about the team that knocked out the Bills and then the New England Patriots back-to-back days. So I'm glad that I get to work here. But no, I have been doing a lot. I've been ramping up my content a bit more. Today I did a 2.5-hour stream. Apparently I'm the sole soldier on the hill of not dying or not overreacting to Brandon Beane not being fired and wanting to keep him around for the Buffalo Bills at least for one more offseason.
So I do like to overpay for your own, man. That's your MO, right?
I'm on that hill with you. I'm okay with Brandon. I have the data to suggest that I agree with you.
And see, that's the problem. That's the problem with football nowadays.
Yeah,
that's the problem with football. That it's all data. It's all data. And unfortunately, humans still have to go play the game and coach the game too. So
you tell me I can't simulate the Madden franchise mode and see who wins the Super Bowl and this call from there.
Yeah, I mean it's all data, right? I mean, why do we play? We just go ahead and run numbers and do the outcome stuff online and do 100 of them, and whoever wins most of them can get in, right?
Yeah, but I have been ramping up the content over there, and I'm also at Twitter at Weekly Huddle. Is also where you can find me there.
Okay, Randy, that was actually a pretty good comment there. I have theories on why Brandon Beane was promoted. I think I shared some of them on Owen's podcast when he invited me on earlier today. But we'll save that for another day. So this podcast, normally on Tuesday nights, it's the Buffalo Bills podcast. We interrupted the Buffalo Bills Tuesday night podcast to cover Denver. But next week, Owen, Jerry, myself, Randall Slifer will be here talking about the Buffalo Bills wide receivers and the wide receivers in the draft. Jerry, do you want to let everybody know about all of the podcasts that you are involved with?
Yeah, I will after this, since we're talking data. Is 2 Pro Bowlers out of 63 draft picks? Is that good?
Jerry, that doesn't count Christian Benford or Spencer Brown.
Is that good?
That's a popularity contest.
Is it good? I just want to know.
No.
That was the one stat I was losing my mind at earlier today. It keeps getting repeated, and that's a stat you want to bring out, but
here's the deal.
The 2 Pro Bowlers are cooking
here's
dots.
the deal. Here's the deal. I have no problem with a coach getting fired. I don't. Coaches get fired all the time. 9 years in, no Super Bowl appearance, whatever you want to say. I get it. I don't agree with how it happened. I don't agree with having to wait 2 days before we send out all this stuff to thank the guy for what he did. But I do have an issue with the guy who's just as responsible for things getting a promotion to president of football operations. But that's a whole nother episode that we can talk about. And by the way, if you want to hear my thoughts on this, I've only done about 72 podcasts that cover the same thing. So anyway, I'm on the Locked On Network with something called Bill Squad. I do twice a week with Joe Marino and Jeremy White. Also do a show on Tuesday afternoons with Locked On Network called Pro Player Squad that we talk about a bunch of stuff. And then we also have our own network called the Overreaction Buffalo Sports Network. I'm on there with Joe Miller and former teammate John Fina, and we cover stuff as well. We've got podcasts all week long. So I think I'm on number 6 for the week already. So it's rolling along. And then Owen and I are going to have our own. Owen and I are going to have our own special podcast where we're going to get into the weeds of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's gonna devolve to me driving to Tulsa and getting absolutely body slammed by Jerry.
No, you're not gonna get body slammed. I'm not that guy, man. Bring it. I enjoyed bantering about it. I think it's great.
The banter that you and John have reminds me of when I used to have arguments with my brother. And I mean that in a kind way. Let me rephrase that. Discussions, heated discussions. They're not arguments. They're heated discussions. I love watching you and John.
John and I have 7-8 years of receipts of being in the same locker room, sitting next to one another for a long, so we've built that up. So yeah, we speak a different language than some, but no, I think that I would love to sit down and hear you guys' theories on why this is good. I would like to hear another viewpoint on it, because I've only keep hearing the same one. So I'd love to hear it.
So
it'll get talked about next Tuesday, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I won't even argue, Owen. I won't even argue. I'll just sit here and listen.
I'll pop in. When's the next time you and John are podcasting?
I'm not sure. I'll tell you off the air on that one.
Okay. Adam, you want to introduce yourself to everybody watching and let them know how they can find all of your other football content?
Yeah, so you guys can all follow me on Twitter at ImpactFBData. On that account, I just tweet stuff about the NFL draft. I tweet out film, tape, data, stats. I mean, whatever you can get. I spend time evaluating high school players, college players, pro players as well. So whatever you can get there, it'll be there on my Twitter account. And then just some more about me. I worked for the University of San Diego, and I work in personnel and recruiting. So that's just a little bit about what I do. And as I said too, Twitter is at ImpactFBData. So you guys can follow me there.
And
awesome.
Gabe,
I just followed you, by the way, Adam.
All right, I'll follow you back.
And as it says there on the screen, I'm Gabe Morris, and you can find me on X at Blue Ridge Bronc 1. Most of what you'll see me putting out there has to do with, it's coming up on draft season, so you'll see more and more content to that, but a lot of it has to do with Denver Broncos. My angle is a little different than some. Probably the thing that interests me the very most in the draft process. We all have access to seeing what happens on the field, but because, and we'll get into this probably a little bit more, but because it's such an important thing to this team, the who the person is behind the play on the field, the interviews around draft time are pretty critical to me in my mind, in terms of how well somebody's projecting how well someone's going to do. So, you'll see a lot more of that type of content as we get into draft season here. My day gig, I'm human resources with a faith-based nonprofit that's a college campus ministry. So, so there's a lot of interaction with various campuses and students as well. So, this is just a cool overlap of interests and life experiences.
Well, Gabe and Adam, I want to say thank you for guest appearing on our show. It's been great having you. I also want to let the audience know, if you go to the Draft Professor Twitter page, which is at NFL Draft Fanatic, no, I am Fanatic. Every Friday, we do a 32-team mock draft. So we do 3 rounds, 32 people picking for 32 teams. And we'll have a couple people on the podcast. Owen was on the podcast that we did last week. It is usually our most watched podcast of the week. You get to hear different people's evaluations of the draft prospects. So last week, for example, Owen, Ian Cummings, and Drew Collins were giving their opinions on like how they had evaluated the players in the top 100. And then this week, it's Price Carter and EJ Holt. So you'll be hearing their evaluations of all the players in the top 100. And it's a really good way to just get a fresh take because not everybody evaluates the players the same way. I know Owen was able to check his evaluations relative to Ian's. I think Pregnon was one of the guys that everybody else seems to like a lot more than Owen. So he was able to ask, and there was that conversation while we were doing the mock draft. But it's a great show. Fridays, 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to draft for your team, go to the pinned post for Draft Professor, sign up, and you will be able to draft for your team, and I can get you all the instructions for how we do it. But we've been going here for a while. So for Jerry, Owen, Gabe, Adam, myself, and the 110 people at the Draft Professor, thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you on a podcast again tomorrow. And a reminder, this time next week, we're going over wide receivers and the Buffalo Bills have under contract, as well as the wide receivers that are in the draft class. So thank you very much, everybody. And we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow.